The story starts with a 16-year-old boy named Brian who has always dreamed of becoming a basketball player. Despite all his efforts, he couldn't make it onto his school's team, the Eagles, and ended up being assigned to carry the players' water bottles. One day, Brian watches his idol Kevin dominate a basketball game, scoring point after point and leading his team to victory. Inspired by Kevin's performance, Brian promises himself that he will one day be as great as Kevin. Filled with motivation, he begins practicing, but every time he tries to score, he ends up falling flat. Meanwhile, Kevin, after his victory, is surrounded by reporters and fans as he leaves the court. His agent, Alan, helps him escape the crowd. The following day at school, Brian is chatting with his best friend Mitch when he notices a new girl named Isabel walking by. His heart races and he starts grinning uncontrollably. Isabel smiles back at him. Later during lunch, Brian can't take his eyes off her. Mitch warns him not to get too carried away since the whole school thinks he's a loser. But Brian is confident, believing that because Isabel is new, she doesn't know his reputation. Determined, he decides to approach her as soon as possible. Then, a prankster named Connor plays a video on the cafeteria TV showing Brian attempting to jump like Kevin using a trampoline, only to get tangled in the net. The entire cafeteria bursts into laughter, leaving Brian humiliated. Feeling embarrassed, he quietly leaves, but Isabel feels sorry for him. That evening, while Brian is sitting at home, his father surprises him with 2 tickets to a basketball game. Overjoyed, Brian dances around the room. Soon he and his father head to the game and Brian is ecstatic to see Kevin playing spectacularly. During the break, the host announces that one lucky spectator will get the chance to shoot a basketball for a $20,000 prize. To Brian's surprise, his father's name is called. However, being the supportive dad he is, he hands the opportunity to Brian, sending him to take the shot. As Brian steps onto the court, he spots Connor in the audience, ready to film his failure. Nervously, Brian throws the ball, but instead of scoring, it hits the team's mascot. Embarrassed, Brian starts to walk away when he runs into Kevin. Kevin encourages him, signs a basketball for him, and tells Brian that hard work can be just as powerful as talent. As Kevin hands him the ball, a strange energy transfers from it to Brian. The next morning, Brian hears on the radio that Kevin played terribly after the break the previous day, which caused his team to lose. Brian feels a bit sad hearing this. Upon hearing this, Brian felt a bit down, but he got dressed and headed to school. That evening, he and Mitch went to a fair where they ran into Connor and Isabel. Connor was trying to win a large teddy bear for Isabel by tossing a ball into the corner net, but no matter how many times he tried, he couldn't make the shot. Seeing this, Brian and Mitch started laughing loudly. Annoyed, Connor grabbed Brian's ball and challenged him to take a shot. Brian expected to embarrass himself, but when he threw the ball, it hit the target perfectly. Everyone around was stunned, thinking it was just a lucky shot. But when Brian kept hitting the target repeatedly, the crowd was amazed. Frustrated, Connor stormed off, and Brian ended up winning the teddy bear, which he gave to Isabel. They shook hands and wandered around the fair together. Meanwhile, Kevin was struggling during basketball practice, unable to make his usual shots. Both he and Alan were worried, especially since Kevin had lost badly in his last game. Alan tried to comfort him, saying that setbacks happen to everyone. Meanwhile, Brian had been practicing at home and noticed a remarkable improvement in his skills overnight. The following day, Brian showed up at school wearing a basketball jersey and headed to the court. The coach, surprised to see him in a jersey, reminded him that he was just the water boy. Brian explained that he wanted to try out for the team. Initially, the coach refused, but after Brian's persistent pleading, he was given a chance to prove himself. He went up against Connor, the team captain. Brian's shots were flawless and everyone was blown away by his sudden talent. People couldn't figure out how he had improved so quickly. Even the coach played against him, but Brian outperformed him too. Impressed by Brian's newfound abilities, the coach finally added him to the team. Over the next few days, Brian played in several matches against other schools, leading his team to victory. He quickly became popular, and everyone at school wanted to be friends with him. Brian also grew closer to Isabel, and soon the two fell in love. On the other hand, Kevin's performance continued to worsen, and the media began to criticize him harshly, damaging his reputation. Alan tried everything to help Kevin, even contacting his mother to motivate him, but nothing seemed to work. One day, Kevin was shooting a commercial for basketball shoes but couldn't even dribble properly. After hours of failed takes, the director eventually gave up and removed Kevin from the ad. Later, Alan, feeling frustrated, was watching TV when he saw a report about Kevin's declining career. Fed up, he changed the channel only to see a news story about Brian. People started referring to Brian as the next Kevin Durant. That's when Alan remembered that just 4 weeks ago, this boy couldn't even make a basket. It was quite a story. At one point, Brian had even thrown the ball 4 kilometers away. Alan began reviewing Brian's game footage and realized that Brian's playing style was identical to Kevin's. This made Alan question whether Kevin and Brian's abilities had somehow switched. He mentioned his theory to Kevin, explaining how Brian, who used to be just an average player, had now become the top talent in the junior tournament. However, Kevin dismissed the idea, thinking Alan was out of his mind. The following day, Alan took Kevin to Brian's school and introduced the two. He urged them to spend the day together, hoping that Kevin's skills would somehow return. Alan suggested they hang out because both were exceptional basketball players. Brian and Kevin spent the day talking and even shared a meal, but despite spending the entire day together, nothing changed, and Alan was left feeling frustrated. Brian's ego began to grow, and during games he focused solely on scoring baskets without passing to his teammates. While his team kept winning, his friends were disappointed, knowing that basketball was supposed to be a team effort. Meanwhile, Kevin struggled through his own match, unable to make a single shot. Fans and the media mocked him, as they had never seen him play so poorly. That evening, Brian threw a party to celebrate his success, inviting many people. However, Isabel wasn't pleased. She noticed that Brian wasn't the kind, humble boy he used to be. She tried to get Brian to talk to her alone, but he didn't want to leave his new, cool friends. Frustrated, Isabel left the party. Soon after, Alan showed up and pulled Brian aside for a chat. He explained that Brian and Kevin had somehow swapped abilities, but Brian refused to believe him. Alan pressed him, asking, "How did you go from being an average player to a superstar overnight? Were you practicing in your sleep?" Alan urged Brian to give Kevin his talent back, but Brian refused, saying, "I didn't take anything on purpose, and I'm not giving it back." Before leaving, Alan cautioned Brian that using someone else's talent unfairly wasn't right, and that he was deceiving everyone. The next day at school, the coach gathered the Eagles team and excitedly announced that they were just 1 game away from becoming champions. The team erupted in cheers. Later, while riding his bike, Brian saw a poster of Kevin. He started to feel guilty, realizing how badly Kevin had been playing and how much his reputation had suffered. Brian knew it was time to give Kevin his talent back, so he called Alan and told him about his decision. Brian and Alan arrived at the court where Kevin was practicing. They urged him, "Come on, take your skills back." But Kevin wasn't willing to accept the idea at first. However, when Brian demonstrated his abilities, even pulling off Kevin's signature move, something only Kevin had mastered, Kevin was visibly surprised. Afterward, Kevin made several attempts to regain his abilities. He used the same ball, repeated the same words, but nothing changed, leaving all 3 of them frustrated. Later, Brian went to Isabel's house to apologize. Though she was still upset, she eventually forgave him and invited him in. Brian then explained the whole story about how he and Kevin had swapped powers, but Isabel didn't believe him at first. To convince her, Brian showed her the video from the day it all happened. As soon as she saw the moment when the ball hit the mascot, something clicked in Brian's mind and he rushed out. Brian headed straight to the basketball court where Kevin was playing. He saw that Kevin's team had yet to score. Brian hurried onto the court and told Kevin that he had figured out how to return his powers. He explained that the ball had to hit the mascot first, just like it had on that fateful day. Brian hit the mascot, knocking it down, and then both he and Kevin held the ball. Kevin said, "I wish I had Brian's talent," and Brian replied, "Hard work can beat talent." Suddenly, an energy transfer occurred, moving from Brian to Kevin, signaling that their plan had worked. As the game continued, Kevin started playing incredibly well, sinking shot after shot, leaving the crowd in awe. His team ultimately won, and Brian was thrilled. The following day, it was Brian's turn for his final match, but he knew he wouldn't be able to perform as he had before. When the game started, Brian struggled, slipping up like he used to, which concerned his coach. Then Kevin and Alan arrived, making Brian even more nervous. But Brian remembered Kevin's advice: hard work can beat talent. Brian rallied his teammates and told them that since he wasn't playing his best, they would have to work together, relying on each other's strengths. With renewed energy and teamwork, they got back into the game. Brian's team scored well, but in the final 10 seconds, they needed 2 more points. The ball came to Brian, and he took a shot for 3 points. Thankfully, the ball sailed straight into the hoop. Brian's team won the match, thanks to his clutch shot. The team lifted Brian onto their shoulders in celebration, and as Kevin bid him farewell, he left the court.